So in this part 2 of the series about understanding variation through the use of distribution on numerical variables or measures or numbers, in a simple sense, let's jump into how to build histograms in Tableau. So here are the topics I want to cover. So first I want to start off with a typical example, a very simple example based on our employee master. We just want to get a age-wise count of employees to get a sense of where employees are. Do we have young people more? Do we have older people more? So that to answer that question. Then central to the concept of histogram is this concept called bin, which is another name for grouping, really. So the first thing that we need to understand is why do we really need to group? So once that need is established, let's see how we can do this manually or automatically, right? So if you want some control over the process, we'll choose manual, but automatic just gets it done very quickly, which then we can customize too. And then how can we change this bin size easily? Because you will see that it takes a little bit of effort to go and change the bin size. Is there a way to get this done easier, right? So that we can easily interact with the histogram. So those are the things we'll cover under the group of bins. And then finally, I want to end with a more complex example, because histograms, they are just talking about just counting of things, or what we call the frequency distribution. So they might seem like a boring thing without much use. But then we could take our superstore sample data, and then I want to build a complex example using the concept of histograms to see how this can be beneficial in a real life scenario. So let's get started. Here is the question that we have. How many employees are in each age group? So if you see, age originally starts as a measure, right? So here in this case, I've displayed this as a blue bucket. I'm not getting into the complexities of how to do that here in this video. So there are other videos explaining that. And then I've just listed how many people in each of these age groups that we can see. 22, there are 7 people, 23. The problem with this report is it's just too long. As I scroll down, there are just 40 different age values. And then the question is about age group. Generally, when we talk, humans talk, we are not really interested in each and every age. We are just interested in some sort of a bucket, right? So we want to group this. So how do we group this? So one of the typical examples of grouping that is done both in Excel and Tableau is when we have a report like this, for example. So we have departments. How can we group this together, right? So what we can do is, for example, I want to select finance, let's say store and security, and group them as support departments, let's say. Now I can edit this and then call it supports. And then this billing and sales, I want to bunch them together. You can use this icon also, which is for the same. And then billing and sales, this is fine. So now if you see, so originally we started off this report with department. So this is how the report looked like, right? So what Tableau has done is, once we created a group, it removed that dimension and put this group thing. So that which makes sense, because we are saying we don't really want to see the detail. If you want to see the detail, nothing stops you from bringing them into the detail. And then if you want, you could even create a hierarchy around this. Then we could collapse and expand as and when needed, right? So this is the concept of grouping. So why can't we do this here, right? So that's my question. That's the reason I took time to explain how grouping works. So we have age as a dimension, and then we have a dimension way of grouping. So why can't we do this here? Let's attempt this. So I want everything from, for example, I want 10, 10 or 5, 5. Let's start off with 5, 5 as a group, right? So from 0 to 5, nothing. So maybe from let's start with 20, and then let's say 24, that those 5 numbers would be one group, right? And then let's say 25 to 29, this is another group. So the first problem with this method of doing is just too tedious. Think about how long this is gonna take, right? So this is the first thing. The second thing is, if you start off here in this thing, so there is 19. So assume I put that into one group. And then in the next refresh, somebody joins at 18. So now I have to go and regroup it again. This is the problem with this, what's called a static group. By default, when you create a dimension group, which is static, you go and define in Tableau, this is how the grouping should look like. Whereas when we are dealing with histograms, we want this group to be almost dynamic, right? So for example, in logical groups, groups of 5, groups of 10. So if I list the same thing, something like this, right? For example, so here, for example, it's 5 groups of 5. I've listed each of these values, yeah. So something like this, right? So rather than listing each of these values, can I see in 20 to 25 how many? That is what we really want, right? So that's where the concept of bin comes, right? So going back to the list, so we looked at the groups and we know groups are static and it is not easy to do them when we are dealing with numbers. And then the second thing is when new values are added, they are not dynamically updated. So what we want to use is this concept of continuous axis that a green ruler has, right? So in a green ruler, we have a starting point and ending point, and then whatever comes in between, whether it is there in this version of the data set or in a future refresh, we don't really care. We define these buckets, right? So if new things come, the buckets automatically expand or accommodate these values. That's what we want to do. Since it's numbers, all we need to do is just define a starting point and then a bucket size, and then we can cut them. For example, I can take this, cut it into 5, 5, 10, 10. So that's all we are doing. Yeah. So now I think why we need the groups is clear for you. So now let's understand how to create a bin automatically, right? So now I'm going to click on age and then go to show me, and then if you see by default it's highlighting a bar chart which will give you just one value, not really useful, and then but it is also highlighting the age, the histogram here, right? So all it is, if you read the description, it is saying creates a bin field, right? So focus here. So if you see here, we got a bin now. So previously we created an age group that was used here, right? So which is that manual thing that we did. So now it has created a bin, and this bin is green. So by default we can see this is green here, this is green here, and then it has put count of age, because we are when we are in histogram, we are dealing with count, not necessarily a typical aggregation like average age or anything like that. And then because it is continuous, it has closed the gaps and then made them continuous. If I just change it to a discrete, you will see it looks like a typical bar chart. So to indicate that it is histogram, so Tableau used a continuous axis, even though we have like discrete values, right? So but since we are taking a number and breaking it down, this kind of a continuous axis makes sense, right? So Tableau has done a beautiful job, right? So is there any problem with this? So if I look at this, it looks like it has used 5 sized bins, right? So 20, 25, 30. Let's verify this. Let's go to bin and then let's describe this. So if you see, this bin size is 3. It does not really used 5, and it has some 13 members. So this is not really good. So let's go and edit this manually. So it's using in fact 3.47. So which is not really what we want. Let's start with 5. So helpful for you is to notice these things that Tableau is displaying. There's min, there's max, and then the difference between the two, which is called the range typically, as well as how many distinct values are there, right? So we saw originally when I listed each value, we had 40 different ages, which is what this is saying, without you having to go and count this, by creating a chart or manually. So far helpful. Let's say okay. So now we see a slightly different type of a distribution. What if I want to change it to 10? So all we need to do is change it again. But then this is a little bit tedious, isn't it, right? So what if there is an easier way to do this? In fact, there is an easier way. So that is called, so if you go here and then press this, so it is giving you an option to create a new parameter, right? So already I created a parameter. Let's ignore that and then just create a parameter for you to understand. So let's call it age parameter, right? I'm not a creative person, as you can see here. So let's put them into buckets of 5, and then step size is 5, so that we can go 5, 10, 15, that kind of a bucket, right? So maybe even maximum 10. That means it will go 5, 10, 15, 20. That's the maximum it would do. So let me say okay. So all I did was, instead of entering a manual number, I gave it a parameter. If you are new to this concept of parameter, here is the simple explanation. Parameter is nothing but a name we are giving to this number. So when we are giving a 5, we are restricted to 5. But when we are giving a name, then we can keep the name, and then histogram is going to take the name and read whatever is coming from that name. It is like this. So you have a postal box that is called age parameter. So now before drawing the histogram, Tableau is going to open this postal box, look at what is there. If 5 is written, it's gonna put a bin of 5. If 10 is written, it's gonna put a bin size of 10. And then the parameter gives us the ability to change this from 5 to 10, whatever, which is what this is, right? So let's do this. So we can see now this is displayed as a parameter. Now I can change it to 5. Yeah, so this is one way. The other is an option to use slider, which gives us this nice way to see. Yeah, so having very big buckets, right? So this does not really give us a lot of sense. So you need to play around with the bucket sizes to see what gives you a sense, right? So as we can see in any typical company, so there would be a few employees who are very old, few employees who are young. Most of the employees would be in the middle. The shape of the curve, this is called a bell curve, right? So if I, for example, use a line, and it's not really an exactly bell curve, but it looks like that, right? So this is the typical shape that most of the distributions in the real world fall into, right? So if you go to a classroom, look at the score. So this is the kind of a case. When it comes to money, the kind of wealth people have, that does not really follow this kind of a distribution. We all know that it is typically a few people at the top end make most of the money. So this is called a different kind of a distribution. Anyway, so that's not the topic we want to get in, but just wanted to tell you that. Yeah, so now let's return here, see what we have covered. So we have covered how to create a bin automatically, how to change the bin size easily using parameters. Now how to create a bin manually. So having seen all the things, so let me just delete this and then show you. Okay, so let's keep it and then create another bin. So all you have to do is click on the measure, right click, create bins. And this presents a box which is very similar to the edit box that we have seen, and the rest all you know. So there's nothing much to explain here. So let's return to the topic. So now that we have done this, so let's summarize this. So histogram is one form of a frequency distribution. I'm using a jargon here. Frequency is telling you we are counting. Distribution means we are plotting this from the minimum to the last value, from the beginning to the end, on its own axis. That's what this jargon really means. So we are talking about histogram means we are talking about counting and then plotting it on the number on its own axis to see what the shape of that is, right? Where the biggest values are, where the smallest value is, their concentration in some buckets and stuff. And then we looked at how to do this in Tableau. So now let's turn to a more complex example. Let's start from scratch. Let me go to Superstore sales itself. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on sales and use show me as usual. So let's see what show me is doing. Show me has created a standard bucket. So it has created this bin called sales bin. So let's uncover what this is. So sales bin, so already I think I set up a parameter, so it is using that. So let's see what that parameter is. So let's show this parameter. So let me show you how this parameter is configured. So as you can see, this is going from 500 to 2000 in steps of 500, right? So it's a good one. So let's hold on to that. So now here step size is 500. If I increase it to 1000, so what is happening is, so we see 3 bars, but why is the axis so big? We can't see any other bars, right? So what's really happening is there are values, but look at this bar. This is 9500. Maybe there are very minor values we can't even see. How do I verify this? Simple, turn on that label. So we will see, yes, indeed, there are these values. For now, let's turn off the labels. Let's continue with them. So now let's look at this count. What is this count telling? So if you look at this, the total is coming to 9,994. And if you remember, this is Superstore data. So we have 9,994 records. So every single line it is counting. But then we are not interested in counting every single line. We want to count the number of orders in each bin, right? So how many orders are 500, how many orders are in 1000, then 1500 or 2000, whatever, depending on the bin size, right? So let's check whether each line corresponds to one order. So all it takes is just go through this order ID. We can see for a single order we have more than one line. So this is like an order line, right? So in a typical order, if I walk into a supermarket and I buy, for example, I can buy one paste and one toothbrush. So that is two line items in an order. So for each of those line items, we have a record here. So we don't really want count of sales, we want order ID. So what do we need to do? So let's bring order ID here. So because we need to aggregate this, that's why I'm bringing this into a temporary area and then converting this into a distinct count because we want that. And then now we can see by hovering over, so we have about 4,900 orders here. Let's bring it as a separate field itself. Now we can see orders, right? So now this is no more needed. So now we can see totally we have 5,358 unique orders. That's what we have. And then they are into 15 different buckets, $1,000 buckets that we are dealing with, right? So this is the starting point. So now what I want to do is, so let's look at the sales that is coming from each of this. So this is 4,900 orders, right? So what's the sales that is coming in? All I need to do is just double click. So now we can see this is resulted in 1.3 million sales. And then now we can start to see the smaller guys, right? So now we can see this person, this bin, which is at 22,000 plus, it has only one order ID that has, you know, a whopping 22,000 plus dollars, right, in terms of sales, one order. And then single order here 17,000. So we can see some of these outliers and anomalies, right, which is kind of really making the distribution not only, you know, unnecessarily big, also kind of difficult to read. But then what we really want to do is to understand the average order size. What we need to do is to take this sum of sales and then divide it by this count. So let me do it in a simple way here, as if I don't understand any of the calculations. So I'm going to copy this by double clicking. So I'm going to press Ctrl C, first paste this, and then what I'm going to do is to come here and then copy this, again Ctrl C, and then paste it here, divide by this. So I'm dividing the total sales by the total orders in each of these buckets, right? So now that is giving us an order size, average order size. So let's edit this so that this is called average order size rather than the cryptic thing. So let me copy this. Now you can see in the tooltip also this is not yet reflected. So let's go to the tooltip and then change it here. Yeah, so I would like to move it to the top and then do a bit of this and yes. So now I can preview. This looks good. So maybe average order size, I want to make it a little bit bigger. Let's say just to make it, yes, sounds good. So now we can see what is the average order size in each of these things, right? So maybe I can even give it a different color so that this one jumps at us, because that's the most important value we are interested in. So now we can see average order size is jumping at us, right? So now we have seen these things, right? So what's happening is now if I change this bin size, I change it to 500. Now we can see what's going on this average order size. So let's bring that at the top really, because that's the number we are interested in. On this alone we can turn on the labels just to see, rather than using tooltip. I can just, so now this has turned it on all, so I am interested only in this. So let's turn on the labels in only one of them. So now we can see there are buckets, you know, so these are really small ones. Yeah, so now what kind of conclusions can we come to from this, right? So depending on the questions you are asking or the analysis you are doing, so you could kind of go and see what these outliers are, right? Where is this coming from? One thing to see is there a pattern on these outliers from a segment perspective, right? So if I bring this segment into, for example, color, right? So now we can see consumer segment, right? So where are they? Do they have any of these outliers? They have, yes, there is a 14,000 kind of outlier. And then corporate segment and home office segment. It seems like these outliers are uniformly distributed, right? One in each one of them. Yeah. So now we can even turn on this filter. For example, I can go to show filter and then I can make this also into a slider. So now I can see each of this, so all the things, and then one by one each of these segments, how the order sizes are. And then since any of these outliers, if you don't really want to deal with them, what we have to do is just go here. So here we are dealing with 22 bins. Instead of this, if I want to just display 10 of these bins, now we can see this, and then I can move it to show all the things. So now we can see materially for the first bins, like 10 bins, what these values are. Or I can even bring down the size to 500. Now I can see 10 bins or even 20 bins. And then see what the values are, what the contribution in each of these segments, right? So this kind of provides as a basis to do further analysis and drill into each of these details, what makes up this order size, what kind of things are coming, right? So as you can see here, I've used a lot of different things. So we have used filters. So we have used filters on a continuous variable, which is sales bin. We have used filters on a dimension. We have used parameters here. We have used segments and tooltips and a lot of different things that we have used here, right? So with that, let's wrap up histogram. So now let's summarize the histogram so far, what we have seen. So we have started with a typical example, which is just to understand age group wise, what's the count of employees. And then we listed each of these individual values, saw this was becoming too much to handle. We wanted to group them. So we used the typical grouping that is available for all the dimensions, which is for like a department. And then we applied that, and then we figured out one, it is static, and it is 2 TDS. To work around both of these limitations, we resorted this concept of grouping on a numerical variable, or grouping on a number which has this green ruler axis, by cutting the axis into equal size pieces. That's what technically is referred to as the bin. And then we saw how we can just create a histogram with bin and everything packaged together using show me in just one click. And then we can also do that manually by right clicking on that measure and doing that. My preferred approach would be to let show me do the job and then just right click and edit it. Makes it much easier from a convention perspective, naming convention and all that. And then finally we also used parameters, which is a name that we give to this number, so that we could change the number easily in the view rather than going and editing this each time, which is much more inconvenient. And then we ended up with a more complex example using Superstore, throwing in a lot of different things, filters, sliders, and all kinds of things to see how we can look at use histograms to understand what the outliers are and what the breakup by segments and different things are, right? So that's all with respect to histogram. So in the next video, let's get into box plot, which is another way of understanding variation in Tableau.